This computer belongs to a man named... He's a 60-year-old resident of Maryland, USA. He uses this computer for his personal needs, but starting today, he also uses it for work. Very sensitive work. Extremely sensitive work. He creates a folder. It contains several files, the tools of his trade. The year is 2010. We can't show you the contents of this folder, and we can't reveal the name of the owner. If we did, you would probably disappear. The man named is a hacker. For 4 years, he has been working for an elite unit within the United States National Security Agency. His work is classified and very, very restricted. It pays well, but there's a problem. Training and improving your skills is difficult. Top spies aren't allowed to go on random swashbuckling adventures for practice. That's why this man broke the rules. At work, he copied some of his tools into a flash drive, along with instructions on how to use them. Then, he brought the drive home and dropped the file onto his personal computer. You might think this is where things go wrong, but they don't. 4 years pass. The owner of this computer keeps coming home and using his secret spying tools after hours. Sometimes he practices, sometimes looks for ways to improve them in the vain hope of gaining a promotion. He adds more and more tools and documents to this computer, filling its hard drive with classified material, until one day in 2014. On this day, things do go wrong. The owner isn't the only one with access to the files on this computer. Well, he's the only person with that access, but the files are also accessed by something else. Unfortunately, we can't tell you what else has access to this folder. You wouldn't disappear, but you'd get into a lot of trouble. Suffice it to say, somewhere out there, a server beams out a set of instructions. Around 600 million computers worldwide receive it. We don't know how many respond, but we do know that the personal computer of a man named does. And this response, this little ping, kickstarts a chain reaction nobody could have predicted. A story that reverberates through the entire world. A leak that causes one of the biggest outbreaks of cybercrime to ever happen. A scandal widely regarded as one of the biggest intelligence failures of all time. And a whole avalanche of international incidents, the consequences of which will be felt for decades to come. But the scandals and the attacks are not even the most intriguing aspect of this story, because this little event, those several hours in 2014, have another effect. They create the most enduring hacking mystery of our time, the mystery of the shadow brokers. The hacker group that appeared out of nowhere caused perhaps the greatest cybersecurity calamity ever, and disappeared. Nobody heard of them before or since. At the time, nobody even had a clue of who they were. How did it happen? Who really accessed that computer? And what role did it play in the ensuing chaos? This is the story of the shadow broker leaks, the pivotal turn in history after which there was no rollback. Everything starts with an acronym, TAO, Tailored Access Operations. It's the former name of the most elite hacking unit at the National Security Agency. For a long time, TAO had nearly mythical status within the field of cybersecurity. It was untouchable, untraceable, a rumor behind some of the most secretive espionage operations to ever be pulled off. Today, well, there's not much mystery left behind it. Between whistleblowers, leaks, memoirs, declassified documents, and third-party investigations, the air of secrecy is long gone. We know that the prototype for TAO was formed in the last years of the 20th century. Its precursor was the Red Team, assembled by the NSA in 1997 to conduct Operation Eligible Receiver, an exercise meant to test American military and civilian networks and see how much damage a few determined hackers could do. Turns out, a lot of damage. In this exercise, the NSA wiped the floor with the entire cybersecurity force of the Department of Defense. Had the Red Team been allowed to go all the way, it would have paralyzed the entire American military. And it really stopped just short of doing that. On one hand, this proved that the DoD really had to invest in cybersecurity. But the secondary effect was even more important. The exercise showed that a team of hackers who can go on an offensive is a valuable asset. And so several key people in the NSA pushed to make such a team a reality. At first, it was a loose collection of personnel assigned to various different branches. In the last months of the year 2000, they were assembled in one unit and got their iconic name, Then 9/11 struck. Defense spending surged. The budgets of intelligence agencies ballooned, leading to an influx of fresh personnel. And through this period, no unit grew in strength and size more than TAO. In a few years, it consisted of hundreds of people. They worked at the world's most advanced hacker den, the Information Operations Technology Center at the NSA. They were the core of that center, but by no means the only unit working there. You see, there are 3 things you can do with your hacking team. One of them is computer network defense, defensive operations meant to secure your networks and make sure nobody's intruding. This was long seen as the NSA's most important job. After all, it is a security agency. A massive part of its efforts were spent protecting communications channels between America's top officials. TAO had almost nothing to do with these efforts. Another of NSA's jobs was to go on cyber offensives, because with the right skills, hackers can also perform computer network attacks. It's basically electronic warfare with some extra steps. You jam, destroy, or wipe the enemy's systems, the classical kind of cyber warfare the governments began exploring in the 1990s. However, that's not what the NSA needed TAO for either, because there's the third kind of hacking, computer network exploitation. This is where things get really scary. The idea is not to destroy the enemy's systems, but exploit them for your own needs. Tap into them, scour them for information, turn them against the owner. This is why comparing TAO to most hacking groups is not entirely fair. Regular attacks are not something TAO really did that often. Exploitation, on the other hand, it was the entire purpose of this team. It was what made it stand out amongst its peers. TAO would be given a target, then patiently wait for months or even years, looking for the most convenient way to breach it. It would work indirectly, exploring all available paths, no matter how unlikely they were. And once the right path was found, the hackers would not rush to exploit it. Rather, they would strengthen it, build up the infrastructure necessary to stay inside for as long as it took, establish persistence, the holy grail of cyber espionage operations. And then, after the TAO personnel knew the adversary's systems like the back of their hand, after the path was proven to be safe and undetectable, surveillance would begin. The hackers would sift through all the data available in the breach network. They would monitor the traffic and vacuum up everything that looked even remotely interesting, plant backdoors for future use, and make sure there was nothing the target can do to get rid of them. The unit would become an invisible, all-seeing eye, hovering above anyone the American government labeled as deserving of this treatment, friend or foe. In the mid-2000s, TAO did exactly this to pretty much the entire Mexican government in an attempt to give the US a better insight into drug crime happening in Mexico. In the late 2000s, it infiltrated the Chinese technology giant Huawei. What began as an attempt to find out whether the company had ties with the government ended in TAO using backdoors into Huawei's equipment for espionage beyond Chinese borders. In the mid-2010s, the group launched perhaps the most ambitious of its known projects, Operation Treasure Map. It was an attempt to accurately map out the internet so that surveillance could be launched on any target in the world at a moment's notice. Just for a second, consider the scale of this operation. The NSA tried to map everything connected to the World Wide Web. Everything. Millions of local networks around the world, hundreds of millions of servers, billions of connections, with billions upon billions of people who could be traced through their devices. Every internet user, every device, every connection, every bit of flowing data. TAO's ambition was to detect it, catalog it, and update it in real time, giving the NSA a bird's-eye view of the entire world. As you can see, TAO was not a regular hacking group. It was a step above even the other nation-state threat actors. It was the NSA's attempt to play God. And here's the scariest part. Very, very few TAO operations were ever detected. Stuxnet was. It terrified the world in 2010 after things got out of control, and many still call it the most advanced cyber weapon to ever exist. But the others, the vast majority of operations launched by TAO, went on for years and decades without anybody noticing. The reason we can talk about them now is not because somebody caught the NSA doing its thing. It's because its own employees decided that the agency went too far. Whistleblowers. But before we talk about them, how about liking and subscribing? We put a lot of work into these hacking mini-documentaries, and some engagement would convince the algorithm to share our work with more people who care about this stuff. Thanks! Before 2013, the Tailored Access Operations Unit was little more than a rumor. People knew it existed. It was even semi-regularly mentioned by the press. But details beyond that were nothing but speculation. The reach, the methods, and even the purpose of this secret organization were largely unknown, and whatever information was out there was often simply wrong. By this point, around 1,000 people worked for TAO. They weren't just regular NSA employees, though. The scope of the work had expanded so much, outside help was needed. The NSA began hiring contractors. These were cybersecurity professionals with previous experience in intelligence agencies. If you were a skilled hacker who worked for a reputable company and had previous experience at the CIA or some similar agency, you had a good chance of landing a profitable gig for a project or two. You would have to have your security clearance established, which was not an easy task in itself. You would have to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. So uttering even a word of something classified would bring the wrath of the entire American justice system down on you. And then you would be in. One of the people who went through this process was a man you've probably heard of, Edward Snowden. By some accounts, he once received an offer to become a TAO employee, but refused. Instead, he was hired by a private intelligence company which was contracted by the NSA. Snowden's story is too long for this video. Maybe we'll return to it in the future installments of No Rollback. What really matters is that just after a few months of working on classified surveillance programs, he decided that the world needed to know what really happens behind the NSA's doors. He contacted a small group of reputable media organizations and sent them a trove of documents he'd scraped from the NSA. This opened the floodgates. At least several other people from various intelligence agencies used the ensuing confusion to leak their own data troves. In the span of a few months, global surveillance conducted by the US went from a rumor to an established fact. Information about TAO and its network exploitation was at the center of this media storm. The leaks were full of top-secret information about this unit, lists of the tools it developed and used, limited information on some operations it pulled off, emails, conversations, catalogs, entire PowerPoint presentations where employees reported the success of their hacking campaigns. Snowden received diplomatic asylum in Russia. Other leakers were never found. Discussions about the ethics of American surveillance and TAO's projects exploded, with some in the US government defending them, and others admitting that the agency went overboard. However, where some found confirmation of their worst fears, others began looking for opportunities. After these leaks, detecting TAO's fingerprints suddenly became a lot easier. Not only did people know what the US intelligence agencies were doing, they knew where to look for them. Cybersecurity researchers suddenly realized they might even have a chance to catch TAO as it descended upon its targets. Multiple companies and organizations attempted to do that. One that succeeded was the most famous Russian antivirus company, Kaspersky. In 2015, it published an extensive report about what it called Equation Group, a hyper-advanced threat actor with a yet unheard collection of sophisticated hacking tools. The report didn't explicitly mention TAO, the NSA, or even the United States intelligence agencies, but the connections were there. The report contained the names of the tools mentioned by Snowden, links to other leaks, and of course, there was the cover art. Although the potential was there, Kaspersky didn't call TAO Death Star or Empire Strike or even Droid Swarm. Instead, it called it the Equation Group. In the midst of other hacker collectors called after bears, tigers, and typhoons, Equation Group sounded tame, almost boring. But here's how Kaspersky got the inspiration for it. According to the report, Equation Group had a habit of using incredibly complicated mathematical algorithms to encrypt its traffic and payloads, something few other hackers had the patience or skill to do. It was painfully obvious that whoever was behind this group employed a lot of gifted computer scientists and engineers. The word equation even came up in the names of their tools a fair bit, hence Equation Group. So Snowden's leaks made people aware of TAO, gave it a colloquial name, and made it much easier to catch. In cybersecurity lingo, it gave the Tailored Access Operations Unit attack surface. And when there is a surface, an incoming attack is just a matter of time. On August 13, 2016, on a website which back then was called Twitter, somebody posted this.
Equation Group, cyber weapons auction.
Accounts with the same name posted similar messages across Tumblr, GitHub, and Pastebin. On some of the platforms, a longer message was attached.
Attention government sponsors of cyber warfare and those who profit from it. How much you pay for enemy cyber weapons? Not malware you find in networks. Kaspersky calls Equation Group. We follow Equation Group traffic. We find Equation Group source range. We hack Equation Group. We find many Equation Group cyber weapons. We give you some Equation Group files free, you see. This is good proof, no? You enjoy, but not all. We are auction the best files.
Auction the best files. Right. But before we go there, there's a lot to unpack in this short message. First off, the name. The Shadow Brokers. It's a reference to a science fiction video game called Mass Effect, where Shadow Broker is an entity that deals in extremely sensitive information. An intergalactic salesman of secrets, if you will. Then, the language. It's not proper English, but it's not typical broken English either. It sounds like somebody intentionally caricaturing the language of a non-native speaker. And finally, Twitter? As a platform, it didn't have a reputation for trustworthy, well-sourced posts, even back in the day. From the look of it, this should have been trolling. But it was not. The Pastebin post had a bunch of links. Using them, you could download 2 password-protected zip archives. The password to one of them was provided. The archive contained exploits, hacking tools, extra bacon, epic banana, jet plow. Sure, going strictly by these names, the whole thing sounds like another layer of trolling. But the tools actually worked. The exploits allowed hackers to breach industrial-grade firewalls, the equipment specifically designed to keep those hackers out. It really looked like something developed by an advanced threat actor. This was not a scam. And the second archive, the one without a provided password, apparently contained something even more powerful. A short explanation painted it as better than Stuxnet and promised to auction the password off to the highest bidder. There was an address of a Bitcoin wallet and answers to a few pressing questions a would-be buyer might have. The leakers left the end date of the auction open, did not declare any monetary goal, and vowed to keep all the money sent for themselves, instead of returning it if the bid failed.
No trust. Risk. You like reward? You take risk. Maybe win, maybe not. No guarantees.
However, they also promised to release all files for free to the public if the total raised sum exceeded 1 million bitcoins, around $500 million at the time. This was a lot. 1/16 of all bitcoins in existence in 2016, a nearly impossible sum of money. But what if it was worth it? Could it be that somebody really hacked the TAO? The question caught the world by surprise. People didn't know what to make of it. You'd think that if there was ever a leak of this magnitude, it would be at least a bit more dignified. After all, Snowden sent his stuff to hand-picked reputable journalists instead of just posting it on social media. If real, this leak was bigger than Snowden's, but it was made by somebody who looked like a random gamer on Twitter. It was a good story though, the perfect enigma, flavored with some anonymous-style internet culture. Maybe the Shadow Brokers really were a scrubby team of basement-dwelling hackers, like in the movies, or some foreign super spies hiding behind masterful obfuscation. The media had a blast. Articles with guesses and speculations were abundant. And of course, each Twitter would-be expert had a contradictory explanation for everything. The buzz was there, but despite that, one thing was lacking. Everybody could see how much money was deposited to the linked Bitcoin account. It wasn't a lot. People were hesitant to send their money to the Shadow Brokers, and apparently, this made them angry. So the account began posting rants, something the Shadow Brokers loved to spend their time on. The following posts weren't leaks, but barely coherent racist ramblings, erotic fan fiction involving US officials, accusations that the mainstream media was trying to cover up their story. Was this an attempt to grab more attention? Or just to convince the investigators that the Shadow Brokers were a bunch of edgy teenagers without an original thought in their heads? Maybe both. In the third rant, they lowered the auction ceiling to just 10,000 bitcoins. And in the fourth one, they dropped another dump of top-secret files. That rant lashed out at Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, who promised the CIA would respond to Russian election meddling.
Why is Dirty Grandpa threatening CIA cyber war with Russia? Oldest control trick in book, yes? Waving flag, blaming problems on external sources, not taking responsibility for failures.
This new dump wasn't about exploits. The file had references to some of them, sure, but it also contained information on hundreds of domains and IP addresses of Equation Group victims. You could clearly see what TAO attacked. what proxies it used, unravel its entire operations. This looked like a masterful promo ad. The shadow brokers had just showed that they were more than legit, that they really had internal access to the NSA secrets. But the would-be buyers were still hesitant, so the shadow brokers changed their tactics. They got themselves an account on a dark web platform called ZeroNet and began selling the files separately. 10 to 100 bitcoins per exploit, several hundred for hacking frameworks. And although it didn't attract as much attention as previous rants, this is when things got even more serious. Among the files now for sale were Dander Spritz and Fuzzbunch, entire platforms tailor-made for infiltration. They included exploits described in the Snowden files, exploits that would make any security analyst sweat. It was like selling hand grenades in a convenience store. If these tools ever reached a wider user base, if they got into the hands of common low-level hackers, the world was going to burn. Coincidentally, at approximately the same time, a lot of large companies began to frantically patch their systems. Microsoft delayed their usual Tuesday patch and in several weeks came out with a massive update. Others did something similar, as if they knew something was coming, or rather, as if TAO suddenly informed them about all the vulnerabilities it found and kept secret. The vulnerabilities that might soon end up in public. In January 2017, the shadow brokers posted another rant, complaining about the lack of attention and promising to go dark, only to return 3 months later and drop another rant.
Dear President Trump, respectfully, what the f*** are you doing? The shadow brokers voted for you. The shadow brokers supports you. The shadow brokers is losing faith in you. Mr. Trump helping shadow brokers, helping you. Is appearing you are abandoning your base, the movement, and the peoples who getting you elected.
The post came soon after the beginning of Donald Trump's first term, and his announcement of a missile strike on Syria, a strike which targeted a Russian military base there. This rant was even edgier than the previous one, embracing pretty much every conspiracy theory that had ever existed. It also admitted that the auction was a failure. By that time, only around 10 bitcoins had been deposited to the wallet, barely enough to pay for just one of the exploits the shadow brokers were trying to sell. At the very end, under all the swearing, conspiracy theories, and outright calls for genocide, there was a password. A password for one of the 2 files uploaded back in August 2016, the one the shadow brokers promised to release for $500 million. For free. Everything promised. Everything for sale on the ZeroNet, and more. Tools to breach nearly every system imaginable. Bypass nearly every defense money can buy, from Windows to super specialized operating systems, from industrial firewalls to popular antivirus software, from consumer-grade printers to massive servers that keep the internet running, all just a couple clicks away. And as if that wasn't enough, a week later, another dump titled Lost in Translation, an even scarier one. It contained a plethora of tools specifically designed to breach Windows computers. Also, a full suite of tools TAO made to infiltrate SWIFT, the international banking system. And, for the first time in the shadow broker's history, operational notes. PowerPoint presentations reporting on the success of NSA hacking operations, with names of their hackers right there in plain text. Compared to these 2 last dumps, Snowden's leaks looked like nothing. It's one thing to let the world know that the NSA has superweapons. It's another thing to completely put these weapons in the hands of every cybercriminal out there, free of charge. The hand grenades weren't sold in a convenience store. They were handed out on a street corner, along with enough other weapons to equip an entire army. One of the people who worked in the cybersecurity industry at the time was David Kennedy, the founder and CEO of TrustedSec. He was a former employee of the NSA and could recognize what was happening, perhaps better than almost anyone else.
It looked to be more and more believable as time went on. And then, we saw all the code then, get released. But I mean, it was, all hands on deck, boots on the ground. Everybody was really freaking out about this entire thing. It was mass pandemonium and mayhem that was occurring during this period of time.
Among the released tools, the most famous one was called Eternal Blue, from the Lost in Translation dump. It used an obscure feature of the Windows operating system to implant malicious code that opened up the target without attracting any attention.
It was essentially a master key for any Windows device in the world, could essentially unlock it, give you access to that specific system, and then from there it would deploy a backdoor called Double Pulsar, which allowed anybody that had access to that framework to connect to that and then essentially fully compromise that entire machine. So it was essentially secret magic code that would completely exploit any, fully patched Windows system at the time that went completely undetected for years and years and years.
Eternal Blue became famous because it enabled two of perhaps the largest cyber attacks in the world, WannaCry and NotPetya. In the coming months, two state-sponsored hacking groups, Lazarus and Sandworm, would take this exploit and bring the world to its knees, inflicting billions of dollars in damage and causing very real harm to millions of people. Remember the three different roles a state-sponsored hacker can play? Defense, attack, and exploitation? This was a tool for exploitation, a skeleton key designed to let spies enter any door without being noticed. What followed was hackers taking this key and using it to sneak an equivalent of a nuclear bomb into people's houses, a network attack of unrivaled proportions. And Eternal Blue was just the tip of the iceberg.
You look at the Linux exploits, the Linux exploitation frameworks, the kernel exploits, like everything from start to finish was really masterfully done. And it really dealt a huge blow to our capabilities worldwide during that period of time when it was leaked.
Take Danderspritz, for example. It was a post-exploitation framework, a tool that basically allowed a threat actor to stay in control of a target device after it was breached. It wasn't an exploit, but a platform that could use a plethora of other exploits and apply them wherever needed. With Danderspritz, you could maintain a connection to your target and monitor its movements. In the background, it would routinely check for any antivirus software to neutralize, swatting it away like an annoying fly. It would monitor the device's parameters, carefully keeping the intrusion under wraps, preventing you from accidentally giving yourself away as you perform surveillance. It even had a tool called Territorial Dispute, which automatically checked the infected device for the traces of other known state-sponsored attackers. And as a bonus, a Swiss Army knife of learning tools that would allow you to replay a real attack over and over again in a training environment. If Eternal Blue was a universal key into any door, Danderspritz was a whole infiltration team from those heist movies, complete with a white van and a comic relief character, and fully automated. People suddenly understood not only how TAO managed to pull off its god-tier hacking operations, but how it managed to stay entirely undetected for so long. Its tools didn't just make hacking almost any target on the planet possible, they made it convenient and foolproof.
In the private sector, in the civilian space, we don't typically see everything that happens from a cyber warfare perspective. The United States is hacking into China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, and vice versa. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran are hacking into us. And so there's this kind of secret underground cyber war that's going on at all times for different purposes and capabilities, whether it's intelligence gathering, intellectual property theft. North Korea specifically goes after targets so that they can get things like ransomware to produce money for the regime itself. And so this was one of the biggest glimpses that we've ever had into how these actual groups operate and how they conduct their operations. And more specifically, aside from the code, it gave a lot around how they did their infrastructure, where they set their infrastructure up at, key personnel that were actually involved in conducting these types of operations, things that are heavily classified and very specific to our missions to be able to conduct those worldwide.
There was another thing that the shadow brokers did with the information they had. They didn't only leak operational notes with the names of TAO employees. Sometimes they engaged with those employees right there, on Twitter.
At MalwareJake, the shadow brokers is not in the habit of outing Equation Group members, but had make exception for Big Mouth.
MalwareJake, real name Jake Williams, is a well-known cybersecurity researcher who regularly analyzed the shadow brokers' dumps. And this tweet was directed right at him.
I was actually teaching for SANS at the time. Teaching exploit development. How ironic, right? But their exploit development class. Ironically, I was sick. I was down in Orlando, that's the biggest SANS conference of the year. I actually remember, was running a fever. I'd actually asked SANS, can you replace me with another instructor? And because it was exploit development, the answer was no. We just don't have enough people to backfill and shuffle. They're like, go ahead and teach and see if you can make it through. And so I just gotten done teaching a bad day bad day because of being sick. I remember going to bed that evening, maybe at midnight. I woke up at maybe 4 in the morning and saw back in the day, the Twitter app used to have the number of notifications, be the bird with a number on it, up to 99, and then it said 99 plus. And then I went to bed for 4 hours in the middle of the night Eastern time, and I woke up to 99 plus. This can't be good.
Like many former government employees, Jake had a bit of a hole in his CV, a period of time when he worked for TAO in complete secrecy. developing the very exploits the shadow brokers leaked. And now, Jake's involvement with Equation Group was leaked too.
6+ months into this, but they never outed somebody by name and made specific claims about them. And I said, look, I still had a top secret clearance at the time. I said, I don't know how the government's going to handle this, right? For all I know, somebody's going to show up here and drag me away or something. So like that whole yesterday when you said there's not a plan, there's not an easy plan to go and start replacing instructors, you better think careful about that, because like that may be out of our hands here.
And Jake wasn't the only one. In subsequent months, the shadow brokers made a habit of addressing the researchers who analyzed their dumps and tried to protect the world from the leaked exploits. The Twitter account would call them out, poke fun at them, sometimes threaten them with doxing.
So my new claim to fame is to have been called a fun guy by the shadow brokers recently.
Coupled with the personal information in the dumps, this spotlight had quite a bit of power. The shadow brokers were in control of a tremendous amount of information, and at any moment in time, they could use that information against cybersecurity researchers, the same people who were trying to mitigate the damage from the leaks. So, what did this enigmatic group do with all of that power? How did they leverage it? Well, it didn't. Don't Forget Your Base, Password Reveal, and Lost in Translation dump were the peak of the shadow brokers' activity, and it was all downhill from there. In June, soon after WannaCry hit the world, the shadow brokers announced a subscription leak service, promising a new dump every month, only to ignore the promise and not dump anything at all. A few more rants followed, insulting analysts, journalists, and politicians, raising the price of the monthly dumps that never came. And that's it. October 2017 was the last time we saw the shadow brokers. They simply never returned. The 10 bitcoins somebody paid them were withdrawn and laundered, without a trace. The accounts went cold. The most mysterious hacker group in history simply faded away without ever saying goodbye. And now the world had to pick itself up off the floor and try to understand what had happened. We've spent quite a lot of time exploring how TAO was one of the most powerful hacking organizations in the world, and perhaps even the most powerful one. So, who could have been resourceful enough, clever enough to breach it? Will we even begin to unravel this mystery in our lifetimes?
Oh, 100%. It's Russia. Like, it's 100% Russia. I've had people come back to me repeatedly, and I'm sure a couple of them are going to watch this and be like, you're outing what I told you. And it's like, nope, because I've heard it from so many different people at this point who have back-channeled me information and said, we know who the shadow brokers specifically are, right? And it's not who you'd expect. And it's not, I've heard even detailed down to, I'm yet to get a specific name, but information that could very quickly lead me to a name. Okay, cool.
But can we confirm Jake's information in some other way? Can we really find any evidence on who the shadow brokers were? Yes, we can. You see, the shadow brokers remain a mystery not because we have no idea about their origins. It's a mystery because some pieces of this story are missing. However, a lot of other pieces are there if you're willing to dig deep enough. For example, some of the pieces are TAO employees that have been charged for mishandling classified material at the time of the leaks. One of them is named Harold Thomas Martin III, a contractor working for Booz Allen Hamilton, the same company that employed Edward Snowden. Between 2012 and 2015, Martin was contracted by the NSA and supported the work of tailored access operations. In August 2016, just a few days after the first shadow brokers post, his house in Maryland was raided by the FBI. Inside, the agents found 50 terabytes of classified data. Martin had illegally snuck it out of his workplace and kept it in his home, garage, and even the car. Turns out, he was a compulsive hoarder who exclusively collected classified material. At least, that's what he said in court. As it turns out, he wasn't even arrested because the FBI or NSA found out about his hobby. The agencies were tipped off by none other than Kaspersky, the Russian cybersecurity company. At some point, Martin contacted them and offered to sell all the classified data he had. Some allege he even began learning Russian, planning to follow in Snowden's footsteps as soon as the sale was complete. Now, we know that Martin was not the shadow brokers. For one, the Twitter account kept posting long after he was in jail. Also, the investigators determined that he never even opened most of the files he stole, just hoarded them and stored them for a rainy day. But this doesn't mean he had nothing to do with the shadow brokers, because at the time, Another interesting story was happening in Maryland. In 2016, we don't exactly know when, the FBI arrested another employee of the NSA. His name was Nia Huang Fa, and he was a veteran hacker with over a decade of secret government jobs under his belt. Thankfully, it's not 2010 anymore, so we don't have to censor his name anymore, and you won't get in trouble for knowing it. Unlike Martin, Fa was not a contractor. He worked directly for the TAO and had been doing that for 10 years. As the court documents revealed, he wasn't exactly happy with his position and really wanted to get another promotion before his retirement. So he would take secret NSA exploits and bring them home. On his personal computer, he would practice with them and look for ways to improve them. Perhaps he was replaying his past operations in the Dandersprit sandbox, or doing something similar with the other tools. But his home computer had something else installed: Kaspersky Antivirus. Like it or not, Kaspersky was the security tool back in the day. Not so much now, but at the time, a lot of cybersecurity researchers vouched for its effectiveness. Maybe, while practicing his operations, Fa wanted another layer of protection? But modern antiviruses are so effective because they use a technique called heuristic analysis. Basically, the program keeps scanning the files on the computer and comparing them to certain malware signatures the company collected in the past. Every once in a while, the database gets updated with new signatures, meaning that the company's server routinely sends out requests to search for particular code associated with malware and collects information on where it was found. One day, the Kaspersky antivirus on Fa's computer received a command to look for signatures of equation group tools. And after those tools were detected, it sent a sample of all of them to Kaspersky servers for further analysis. How do we know that? Well, Kaspersky actually admitted it. Here's what happened. In October 2017, an unnamed Israeli intelligence officer told the media that a few years earlier, Israel had hacked Kaspersky Lab. According to the officer, his unit in real time observed how Kaspersky was adding TAO signatures to their database and sending them out, pinging computers worldwide, looking for those hacking tools. Whether that was true or not, we don't know. But Kaspersky itself confirmed that in 2015, it was breached by what it calls Dooku, a tool mentioned by the shadow brokers. It's fairly well known that Dooku was not the work of Equation Group, though. It was a hacking framework used by Unit 8200, the Israeli intelligence corps. Responding to the officer's allegations, Kaspersky released several lengthy blog posts where it confirmed a part of the Fa incident. It said that in 2014, the company's antivirus really detected signatures of TAO hacking tools on a computer in Maryland and brought them home. Supposedly, the staff deleted the files immediately. Interestingly, in one of the posts, the company described the incident as having happened in 2014 and said that nothing of the sort happened in 2015, as the Israeli officer alleged. Fun fact, it also remarked that Fa's computer was infected with something known as SmokeBot, a backdoor used by Chinese threat actor called Zulu. Supposedly, the malware was picked up by downloading pirated software on the same computer Fa used for his top-secret escapades. In any case, Eugene Kaspersky, the founder of the company, said he was personally informed about the situation and made the choice to delete the files. And that's the full extent of what we know for certain. In the early and mid-2000s, two people who worked for the NSA hoarded secret TAO tools and documents at home. At least one of them had the tools downloaded by Kaspersky Lab, and another one voluntarily tried to give his collection to the antivirus company. It is entirely possible, and even quite likely, that at some point Kaspersky was also installed on Harold T. Martin's computers and swept up his hoard as well.
To me, the Harold Martin looks to be kind of the closest one that we know of during that period of time. You know, he wouldn't necessarily be needing to actually access those or use those in any way, shape, or form. Could have been exfiltrated without him actually doing it. So that could be true. I mean, all ties definitely point to Kaspersky being the central point of kind of ground zero where this all occurred from. And that doesn't mean that maybe, you know, Kaspersky itself, the entire corporation, was involved in this specific area. You know, they might have had key employees that worked in the heuristics, you know, department of Kaspersky that also have great ties with the Russian government. I mean, being largely based out of Russia, you'd assume, you know, being a large security company, one of their top security providers in that country, that they have very good ties with the government. I would assume, you know, what probably happened is they had a number of employees there that worked there, saw these tools, saw that was from, you know, a specific advanced persistent threat, you know, most specifically a nation state, and then leak those specifically to the Russian government because of that. So it doesn't mean that the entire company itself was under doing this entire thing under the cloak of night.
This is an important distinction to make. The theft of TAO tools did not have to be a deliberate and premeditated action. And Kaspersky did not have to work for the Russian government. Eugene Kaspersky might have really given an order to delete the files. But all it would take for the files to leak is one employee, somebody whose incentive didn't align with Kaspersky's worldwide business interests. Because a few months after the leaks, the US government banned Kaspersky products on all government devices, another indication that the company did something to anger the government. But what about the next steps? If Kaspersky was really the origin point of the leak, why would this data end up on Twitter of all places? Could the rogue Kaspersky employee be the shadow brokers?
Yeah, I think it's undeniable there could be a Kaspersky nexus there. I don't think that necessarily accounts for, how that data made it into Russia's hands. Like, I separate the who is it, right, from the how did they get it, right? They could have gotten it from an insider, right? Maybe my sources tell me, Jake, we know for sure it was an insider or whatever. It wasn't, okay, cool, but like the fact pattern after that data walks out the door doesn't match an insider.
What it does align with is the situation in world politics. The shadow brokers leaks weren't random. They came at specific times in history when the US and Russia were, for a lack of a better word, in the midst of another informational battle.
Attribution's hard though. It's an assessment. It's not, it's never fact-based, right? Even if threat actor came out and said, I am the shadow brokers, you'd still have to assess, do I believe them? So there's always assessment there. But, I look at a lot of different areas here. One, every time there was a shadow brokers drop, and I published about this right before they, right before they outed me. But I noted, the correlations between shadow brokers drops, basically that they were always immediately following some international press, and particularly Western press, that was painting Russia in a bad light.
Their cover story? The auction. But that seems suspicious right from the start.
The whole pretext, right, was like, with the original drops, they said, oh, here's some samples, and if you want the rest, pay us a bunch of money. We're going to have this public auction where you just send us crypto, and we'll pick the highest bidder, and it must be worth millions of dollars. That doesn't hold water. Nobody really believes that. If they wanted to go sell these exploits, like these are, they could have made millions and millions of dollars on these, selling these through exploit brokers. It was fantastically valuable material. They didn't.
If you are confused about the exploit brokers, don't be. We have a whole video on it. The zero-day market, a massive underground network that trades in exactly these types of tools. The shadow brokers really could have sold all of their wares there, earn obscene amounts of money in a matter of days, and we'd have never heard a word about it, which indicates that their motivation probably wasn't money. Well, the rants kind of confirm that too, but the determination to stick to the auction for so long and then just dropping the files for free definitely tells us that showing off and attracting the media was their primary focus. For one, the shadow brokers seem to really understand how the Western press works. For a year, they had been stealing headlines, and then complaining that those headlines weren't enough. They had also been doing that at the precise moments a statement needed to be made, to either distract the media's attention from some other story, or just muddle the water. And that's just one way they made a difference.
The second way, though, is a little bit more subtle. This is during a time when Obama is pretty heavily calling out Russia for its state-sponsored hacking. Putin famously is like, oh no, we don't have Russian hackers. We have people in Russia like painters, and hacking is their art. And they wake up and say, oh, I'm going to go hack. And of course, nobody believes that. That's just garbage, right? But, there's a bit of, if you can turn around and say, hey, look, the US is doing it too. It's not just us, right? The US is doing it too. And simultaneously cut off, right, their tool set, that's huge.
Jake was not the first one to make the connection between the shadow brokers and Russia, though. Back in 2016, immediately after the initial post, Edward Snowden pointed out that Russian intelligence services were the most likely culprit. As for which intelligence service exactly, that's something we are very unlikely to ever get an answer to. Russia has a lot of them, and nearly all of them have their own hacking departments. Whichever of them got to Kaspersky's systems first would have probably done it the same way. This would explain why the US government, with all of its surveillance and intelligence, was powerless to catch the shadow brokers. They can indict foreign state actors all they want, but they can't reach out to Russia and put them in jail.
We have the full power of the intelligence community, the intelligence apparatus, right? This is a huge slap in the face to NSA. You cannot convince me that NSA did not have a task force working around the clock, not to mention the FBI, of course, CIA with Vault 7, right? You just can't convince me they didn't have a task force on this. They may even still today, I don't know. But as a result of there's no US person that's been charged or is behind bars or anything there, I'm just not buying that, I'm just not buying that that it's just an insider, right? That was, playing as a Russian.
That's pretty much all that can be said about the attribution of this leak. With a fair degree of certainty, we can say that the exploits were kept by the employees of the NSA on insecure devices. They were extracted by Kaspersky Antivirus, and then transferred to the Russian government, which decided to leak them to humiliate the NSA. In the subsequent months and years, these tools were used in countless cybercrime operations, some of them performed by the Russian intelligence agencies themselves. Those agencies might have gotten plenty of use out of them even before the leaks, too. So the public fallout might only be a fraction of the total damage caused by the theft. The NSA had to adapt, though. Practically TAO's entire arsenal had to be rebuilt from scratch, setting all of its operations back years and years.
Definitely brought me back to a lot of my old days of understanding what was kind of happening. And I was very disappointed to see it all leaked out there because those definitely hurt our capabilities here in the United States. And what ends up happening is that, we have to completely rebuild and retool how we conduct our operations. So we can no longer use, any of that same code anymore. We can't use the same capabilities anymore. The vulnerabilities, the actual exploits that were used to gain access to those systems are now completely burned. So we can't use those techniques anymore. And so what ends up happening is a lot more research has to go in. You have to completely, essentially rehaul how, that specific group conducts their operations, which set us back several years to really conduct more operations in a similar fashion or different fashion that we saw.
And whatever was rebuilt probably wasn't as powerful as it was before. Because not only did this story show that TAO wasn't as powerful as it looked, it also taught the US government that hoarding vulnerabilities for espionage purposes is a dangerous sport.
If I were going to speculate, right, and I should be clear, this is just 100% speculation, I would suspect that they probably are leaning a bit more heavily towards disclosure for most vulnerabilities. That last kind of set there, right, subset of privilege escalation or remote code execution vulnerabilities that can be weaponized reliably, right? This is where I think there's probably been some change and probably some shift towards disclosure, right? Gravitating towards disclosure. I think previously there was a lot more voices in the room that were saying, hey, this is a critical intelligence capability, and we definitely, we're going to be the ones to use it. We'll tell you when we're ready to disclose. It's a little bit dated now, but in the early 2000s, maybe even into the early 2010s, NSA generally had this idea, and Five Eyes had this idea of NOBUS, and it stands for nobody but us. So basically, some of the capabilities they considered to be so advanced and so far outpacing what was publicly discussed, right? There was an assessment made, and this is huge egos, right, at stake here, that nobody but us could do this kind of thing. Nobody but us could find this vulnerability. It's pretty easy to eye roll away and be like, okay, sure, Jan, right? But at the time, that really was the prevailing thought, including when the VEP was formed. So I suspect that, if I were going to speculate on one of the big changes, I think it's abundantly clear at this point that the NOBUS is that attitude is dated to the extent it was ever valid. It is no longer.
It's fair to say that the shadow brokers had extreme ramifications, both in the hacking community and the world as a whole. It might not look like it, but we really just scratched the surface here. And there's a lot more that can be said about the impact and the consequences of those leaks. We may look at some of that in our other videos. The shadow brokers enabled a lot of earth-shattering hacks, and No Rollback is all about the events that changed the cyber world past the point of no return. Do you have a suggestion about the next hack we should cover? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and maybe also share this video with somebody who might want to know about this story too. Thank you, and thanks for watching.